if it goes with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just trying
Right,
to figure
right,
out.
right, right, yeah, yeah.
I would say presumably.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Get out my hand sanitizer and move.
My co-chair is not here.
All right.
There he is. Thought you were abandoning me.
I realized I was late.
He tried, but then he realized he was late.
That's right.
Worse than that, I didn't read the schedule properly. I thought I was going to I was planning to actually go to JFP.
Oh, yeah.
I'm able to
Go right ahead. Yeah, yeah, yeah. People are still floating.
So I had dinner with Laura last night. Laura said to Jay at the night school, and Jay is now. Right. But testing negative. We just got some.
So you didn't really have a cold.
Other viruses. Well, and actually, you'll note my not all coughs are COVID. I had bronchitis 3 weeks ago. I'm still coughing, and they told me I could go for as long as a month. I just test regularly to make sure it's not also COVID.
Right. I was on an airplane like 2 weeks into SARS.
Mm-hmm.
Guy 2 rows behind me coughs and immediately goes, "I just have a cough." I just have a cough. Like, announces it to everybody because everyone was just but it was just so funny. I mean, like, but it just felt bad because he also had a cough, so he shouldn't be yelling.
You want me to?
I can. We can swap it on or whatever.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I'm trying to.
They immediately pick up all their stuff and they run to the other end.
Seems like I just did this at IETF breakfast meeting. We see the same thing.
What's that? Yes, right. It's the same people. Yeah, we have a few extras. All right, you want to get started?
Sure. Is that working?
Sounds good. Go ahead.
Can people hear me? Am I mic'd?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
I imagine Clemson, right? Welcome to RSWG. If you're not pushing RSWG, go somewhere else. I guess come to the next slide. Do I do that?
I
Yeah. Okay. Great.
okay. I knew there was a purpose in that. Oh, yeah.
So yes, so there's some confusion about exactly what Noel should be shown, which we'll cover later in this meeting. For the purposes of this discussion, Please be aware of the note well. Here's slide 1, and you can mentally substitute RSWG for IETF in some but not all of these sentences. So particularly, you're still consenting to the IETF making a photographic record, apparently, as opposed to the RSWG. Please be familiar with this. And your next slide, has some RFCs, which again may or may not apply. So assuming you understand these rights as I've explained them to you, we'll move on. So we have like a relatively short agenda. This just got formed. So mostly we're hoping to sort out some ground rules. So we want to talk about 4 things. Sort of get a sense of what people think, the scope and of the work and acceptance criteria are. And I know Elliot had posted some thoughts on acceptance criteria. Talk about some logistics, everybody's favorite topic being GitHub. Then cover basically, then we had a set of proposals for like, things you might look at and just like make sure everybody's aware of them and see if anyone strikes anybody's fancy and really want to work on it. And then I guess all their business in case there is other business. Thank you. Does anybody object to this agenda as I've explained it? No. Okay. So just to remind you, this is our charter. This is, in fact, pretty much the only description of what our scope is. But the key word here is policy. And I guess members of the community and collaborate. So this is just like background for, what it is we're supposed to be discussing. Next slide. I'm sorry at that. Oh yeah, sorry, yes. So here is the description of the workflow for what we're supposed to be doing, which will look very familiar to you, in that it will look very much like an IETF working group where people produce proposals, we adopt them, and then eventually, we refine them and we ship them out. Is there a second slide with this, or is this the first? No. Okay. Right. So with that in mind, I think this is the chair's put about like how to sort of drive this. Again, so if someone poses some new work, our theory is it better be about policy, number one. There better be some enthusiasm to work on the topic, because otherwise we're not getting anything done. We think we can get some kind of consensus in the solution, even if there's not consensus on the proposal itself. And finally, we have a proposal that seems like a plausible starting point. And again, this is just like me mirroring all the crap that we all normally do in an IETF working group. And of course, these are all decided in the usual way by rough working group consensus. So I know there's some discussion on the list. Does anybody think that this is like a bad place to start? Or, oh, Robert, thank you. I can't see.
Hi, Ecker. I just wanted to ask you to stay closer to the microphone. You're fading out for the remote people.
Okay, well, I'm about as close as I can be without actually. I see. All right. How about that? Great. So this is not intended to be like holy writ, but does anybody think this is like radically wrong or wants to propose some revisions or some other criteria that I missed or something like that?
Comments?
Miria.
Yeah, Mia Kulevin. So I don't think this is wrong, but it's still very blurry. I'm not sure how helpful this is, but we will see.
Okay. What we're expecting is to sit and wait for proposals to come in.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, all of these points, it's like when proposal comes in, we actually don't know for sure it's about policy, right? We have to have the discussion. And
Sure.
we don't know at the beginning, like, if we will reach consensus
Sure.
or whatever. So, like, these are good goals, but not sure how much that helps.
Okay.
Lars Eckert. So one thing that came up earlier today with the RSAP is that there's also this issues that might arise from the RPC that they bring to the RSAP, and the RSAP decides policy work needs to happen, and they should then be brought here. So even when there's no enthusiasm, you got to do something occasionally because the RPC depends on it. But otherwise, this is good.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to make Lars's point in a different way, which is there are some things that are sort of like it's more expert review than policy. And yeah, and I think it's probably worth explicitly saying that not everything is in scope here, and there's some stuff that needs to be pushed down to a level so that people can keep the documents flowing.
Yeah, this is trying to capture that, but may have failed to do so. So I'm not proposing to write a draft here, but this is just we just want to make sure people didn't think some radical other structure was needed. Okay. Oh, Nottingham.
All right, no, wait, is that where, okay, sorry. It always makes me click like 5 different buttons. I kind of wonder, it seems to me we might be able to take some of the heat out of the policy versus not policy issue if there were a mechanism to say, okay, that's something that, we've brought to the community's attention. It's not policy, but it can go to, the RPC in a discussion in a relatively transparent way. And what I'm thinking about is I think it was mentioned earlier on about having an issues list for the working group, and
Yep.
so if I feel like there are some things which are maybe surfing below or just around the level of whether what is or is not policy, rather than kind of face planting the working group into having a big argument about what is and is not policy. If we have an issue, we say, okay, that's something that we would like to improve, or that it's not really pure policy, but at least we get it out in front of the community. The RPC can hand it off, and it's not something that somebody says, "Oh no, you should just go talk to the RPC directly." I think that might take a little bit of the heat out of this kind of zone, if that makes sense. Just something to think about.
Thank you. Paul.
Paul Hoffman. So many working group mailing lists are for working group work plus other stuff that's not working group and stuff like that. And that can get really messy, but also it's really terrible to say, no, you can't talk about that here and there's nothing else. So I'm not proposing a solution, but some of the stuff that people said before about there might be an RPC thing that comes in and such like that. That could be not working group work that's on the mailing list that just needs to be looked at and said, okay, we know that that's not policy. We know that's not happening, and treat it like a normal working group mailing list where other stuff might or might not happen. Having said that, that's a really attractive nuisance about everything in the RFC editor series. So I'm not saying that's a good idea.
So let me show you the next slide. And we sort of anticipated that we're going to end up with some sort of issue tracker. So this is logistics, but I think it goes to your point that there are going to be sort of issues looking for a draft, looking for people to pick up and champion the idea, and gather together some thought that, yes, this belongs here and we want to write this up and we want to get the working group to work on it. And then independently, we're going to have, once someone proposes a draft and adopts it, which is really the main portion of the workflow as stated in 9280, then we're going to have a draft to work with, and we'll have issues on that draft as the working group goes through it and works on it. So I think, yeah, we're going to have those issues where people are, well, we should think about what this is and whether this belongs here, and that discussion can go on and sort of have that as a parallel track to, oh, and here's the work that we're actually trying to get done and write a new policy for. Does that sort of go to what you were looking at? Paul nods his head up and down. Miria.
Yeah, Mia could have been again. I just wanted to remind this group that there's still the RFC interest mailing list, and that will stick around. So it's not like there's no other place to go.
Good. So with regard to logistics, like I said, we've already seen a number of issues, both in the form of drafts, but mostly in the form of, hey, here's something I think this group might work on. So we've been talking about it. We're thinking that we can simply use GitHub as the issue tracker, but we are not wed to that. Either way, discussion of any of the items takes place on the mailing list. But we will need some sort of tracking device. If people have strong feelings about it one way or the other, please do mention, but otherwise we're just going to figure out what feels comfortable and go ahead and do that. Like I said, it'll end up on the mailing list one way or the other. So if there's no comments on that, we've got the list of things that people have brought up on the mailing list. And if people want to just give a quick, this is what I'm thinking about, this is what I think needs to be done, and you are present in the room, except Robert jumps in and has a comment. Robert, go ahead.
No, I just have a topic that I wanted to call out, so put me at the end of the queue after the people that are already on the slide have had an opportunity.
Sounds good. So This is, do we have a second? Yeah, we have 2 slides of this. So I'll just call off issues, and if people want to come up and say something about them, please do. Paul, did you want to talk about the documenting the relationship stuff?
Just super briefly, because it should be on the mailing list, and it's,
Right.
as we could see, it's complicated. I wanted to see if there was interest. It seems like there's interest. There may be interest in doing it a different way. We already have a worked out example from earlier. But I didn't know if people had burnt out on it and didn't want to deal with it, or want to deal with it. And I got the feeling people want to deal with it, and then we'll have to figure out splitting things out and such like that. But
I mean, going back to the logistics issue, and Ecker and I haven't talked about this particularly, but my sense is, we don't have a draft yet. We're trying to figure it out. Ecker and I are here to moderate that discussion and sort of move it along, but it doesn't become a working group item until there's an agreed pair of or 3 or 10 authors who say, yeah, we're going to work on this document, put the draft out there, and say we want this adopted. So we'll manage those discussions, but and so this discussion we can continue on the list until you all decide, yep, we want a draft and we want to get this adopted. Is Brian in the room? I didn't see him. No, Brian's not around. Does anyone want to comment on Brian's proposal with regard to updating and versioning?
I can just gloss these. So I mean, this was basically the perennial question of like referential integrity for, when you talk about SIP or RFCs and you get a BIS, like how does that work? And how do you, do you have standard numbers or dot numbers or whatever? So that's what this topic was about. So I don't know if people have enthusiasm for that, but that's what this topic was. And I can just go, I mean, I put these in so I can go through these. This next topic, and so I think our plan is basically to take each one of these and make an issue about it, and then I think I'll probably just cut and paste out of the emails that introduce them, so that we'll have a description. And then Paul, if I don't do it properly, you can feel free to like edit the issue, whatever. So this next topic, in fact, was something what Miri was just talking about, which is, and Pete, what's going on the RSWG list versus the RFC interest list. Then these next 2 there are apparently a number of RFCs that are either in an unknown status or in a legacy stream. And are we going to attempt to repair that? And if so, how? This next topic is apparently the IEB stream is not chartered to produce BCPs, and yet it has done so. And so we have to manage that somehow. So these 3 are all like, we created a mess in the past, and do we care? Next slide. Right. Can RFCs be on more than one stream? I'm not sure this next one is policy, but what should be in the RFC email announcement? There's been a lot of questions of the boilerplate and whatever. This author ethics point, I know this came up in the IETF list, was, what is your responsibility as an RFC author and a draft author if you're taking work that someone else has done, but you're not making them an author in your document in terms of acknowledgement or whatever. I think, especially in cases where you're essentially just taking someone else's document wholesale, which is permitted by the copyright, but maybe not by better practice. A topic that came up this morning, format evolution. I think, the more I look at 9280, the more I see it as a framework for creating self-governance rather than as a framework for self-governance. And so, we didn't actually write down who's responsible for actually doing the pieces of format evolution. And so if we want to have the format evolve, it seems to me probably, looking at it personally, it seems to me nobody's actually empowered to evolve the format right now. And so they're working, Paul, you may want to disagree. So,
Paul Hoffman, I read 9280 as that is absolutely part of this working group. That is, it is policy. What is an RFC is policy. And since, the format is, how does the RFC exist as bits on disk, much less on the wire? I totally thought it was that. If I purposely wasn't involved in the creation of 9280, if it wasn't there, that seems like a massive oversight, because that's one of the pieces of work that's been ongoing for years.
I guess my sense is that there was going to be some arguing about exactly what was policy and what was mechanism in terms of like, so this work you'd be deciding like what the names of the tags are. But I think we're certainly empowered to direct. My sense is we're empowered to direct that work, but exactly how we divide up that work is perhaps a question that needs to be designed. Michael, I think Robert and then Robert. Oh.
Elliot
Yeah. So I will enter into that conversation. I think that this working group is the place that we have to do the evolution of at least the grammar, and probably is the group that's going to be the touchstone on dealing with some of the technical issues, like if we decide to make radical changes to the way RFCs are presented, like changing out the CSS entirely for the way the RFCs are presented on the RFC editor's website, for example. I really do think that we need to have a venue that is consensus based, and I was expecting this group to be that group. So that I can get out of the queue, I will bring my other existing topic up. You can add it to the slide if you want, or just put it in the issue tracker later. I would like to see this group take on changing the policy for internet drafts and the RFCs to allow UTF-8 throughout the document and not just in names.
Elliot?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening to those in Europe, and I think it's good morning to those who are down under in Australia and New Zealand. I want to just comment about the format evolution. We were, I think, intentionally vague in stating things in terms of what exactly the RSWG wants to pass judgment on. And I say wants to, because I think at the end of the day, the RSWG can pass judgment on whatever it wants to pass judgment. It can draw the line of policy wherever it wants to, but with the understanding that we as the RSWG can break things very badly for everybody if we get it wrong. So we should just choose wisely, but it's also one of the reasons we should walk and not run in this process and try and just step through, learn as we go. We don't have a lot of running code, which is to say we have none in terms of how these groups operate. You saw the sort of fumbling that we did in the RSAB today. We're going to do more of that as we get through this process, and we'll just have some patience to try and figure out how to draw the line in each case. All right, thanks.
Mike?
Mike St. John's. I want to go back to what Ecker said a little bit earlier about how the document is more of a framework. It is a framework, not really a finished thing for what this group is going to be doing. The charter isn't a charter. It's sort of a statement of interest, and it may be worthwhile to spend maybe the first month or so trying to say what we're going to start with and just sort of get a basket around that. Otherwise, we're going to be piecemealing ourselves out into a lot of space, and we won't make progress on anything. Going back to what Elliot was talking about, I wasn't saying anything, but the RSAB is the final decider on whether or not it's policy or not. I mean, you can say it's policy here, but if they disagree, it's not gonna move forward. So having a discussion with the RSAB at some point along the way to get a line or sort of a fuzzy line might be a useful thing as well.
Thank you. Oh, it's back.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Mike. Now I'll comment sort of with the, my RSB member hat. I don't think that policy was a criteria for making a decision. If it doesn't break the stream and I don't perceive it as, if I don't perceive it breaking the stream or breaking the long-term interests of the series, that's sort of the measure. I think those are the measures that 9280 states, and those are the measures by which I will judge something in the, as with my RSAB hat on. Just that's my own personal view in terms of how to interpret 9280, and I just want you guys to know going forward that that's how I'll look at it.
Sorry, me again. Elliot, I understand where Elliot's coming from, but at some point in time, you have to keep this group from basically micromanaging the people who are doing the publication and pieces of that. And that's why I'm saying that there ought to be some discussion about where that line is drawn, because otherwise we're going to get into trouble really quickly.
So Mike, I tend to agree with you, but I also don't think we have to be too theoretical about it. That to a certain extent, as the discussion develops in the group about a particular proposal, I think we will be able to say, hey, this is or isn't a policy question for these reasons, and then develop what we think the principle underlying that is as we go. So I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of upfront time sort of imagining what is and isn't policy. We can take on issues and develop that policy as we're working.
I just want to add that that 9280 contemplates and in fact expects that the RCB members will participate in the discussion. And so I would hope that as we have these discussions of individual things, that they would in fact say, you know, well, we think this is, you're micromanaging now, and like as my RCB hat, like I might be sad about that, or vice versa. Mr. Hoffman.
Paul Hoffman. So one thing that's not on this list that has come up in my mind a few times is, as we are doing policy for RFCs, that kind of schlumps into policy for internet drafts. It certainly we could limit it to the last internet draft, or the internet draft that gets sent to the RFC editor must blah, blah, blah. But then everyone knows that there should be ones before. I don't have an answer for that. I know that's not in our charter, but a bunch of the stuff we've talked about will probably slump back into the internet draft series, whether we are being on it or not. Don't know how to do that, but I think we should be aware, because there are many people who would say internet drafts can do anything. Don't limit us there.
Lars is behind you to strongly agree.
Hey, Lars Eggert, now I have two things to say. So one, I disagree because it's the ISG who's in charge of the internet drafts and the format, right? And so there'll be blood, I guess, if this group wants to go into that space. But that said, right, internet drafts are produced using the same tools as RFCs, and therefore there's a natural bleed over, which is what you said, right? So we got to sort of have some communication, and we want that. But the policy for internet drafts is set by the ISG. The thing I actually got in the line for is something else, and we've been talking about, you know, this group does policy, but it's actually doing policy for the series, right? And specifically, in my mind, that means this is about the what do you want from the series, not the how do you get to the thing, right? Which would be the production center's responsibility, and other groups, the streams maybe. And maybe thinking about it this way sort of eliminates some things or rules them in or out of scope.
I mean, that's how I've been thinking about it. So for instance, I mean, I was thinking like one might say, you know, we want the RFCs to render in 2 columns, and we'd like Robert figure out how to do it. Well, CSS did it, but we wouldn't be like, you know, here's what to use CSS grid or masonry, or, you know, or Flexbox. Gene.
Hi there, Jean Mahoney, and I am putting on my RPC hat and saying, hey, I will be participating in this working group and providing the RPC perspective on these questions.
Welcome. Okay, well, that was good. Probably got that one done. The other 2 items that exist are concern about errata trolls. This is Brian again. Are we seeing a bunch of errata that's sort of messed up? And should there be any more gateways on errata to make it more difficult to post them? I'm not taking a position on this. I'm merely noting this as an item that came up. And the final item is the one I raised earlier, which is like, what, if anything, we need to do in the NoteWell text to make it, and maybe associated RFCs to make it properly match the practices we have here. So when I looked at the NoteWell text earlier, I noticed that basically it seemed to have 3 broad chunks. One, the anti-harassment policy, which we all agreed in 9280 is that we're going to adopt the IETF anti-harassment policy. So it's merely a matter of doing whatever, screwing around with the NoteWell to make it properly point that out. Then there's the IPR sections, which it's actually 9280 sort of an admission is not actually saying anything about whatsoever, and that may be sort of unfortunate. But presumably we have to, since we're taking the So we're taking things in our drafts, and we're presumably expecting the boilerplate. But it's worth noting that that it's not clear we incorporated the patent thing by reference. So that'd be nice to work out. And then finally, there's sort of the material about like, where you're consenting to being photographed when you come to the meeting, and when you're like, agreeing to have the IETF process your data and whatever. I suspect those just stay as long as you're in an IETF meeting, because it's part and parcel of being an IETF meeting. In any case, I'm not saying with all this now, but the extent to which people would like to take a look at the note well and be sad about it or suggest revisions, that would be helpful, because we just took the IETF one for the moment. And with that, we have all their business, which may be nothing, but maybe people who want to stand and speak for something important, or suggest that we discuss one of these topics in more detail. Oh yeah.
One quick one. This is Pete, by the way. One quick one that came up this morning in RSAB. My thought was that meeting-wise, we're going to do face-to-face simultaneous with IETF meetings, even though we are not officially an IETF working group. And we can do everything else on the mailing list, and there's no expectation short of emergencies to have interims. So if folks think that that is an acceptable way to go, we do need to work out with the Secretariat, because this is a broader community. You might want to attend the RSWG at least remotely without attending the IETF meeting and paying meeting fees. That we may need to work out something to have that happen. But beyond that, the logistics seemed, we'll meet here. If you're coming to the IETF meeting, you can meet in person. Otherwise, you can meet remotely. Lars.
Yeah, that was a good summary. Thank you. And I came mostly here because if we're meeting at the IETF, right? So there's text in the RFC that says, the stream managers, or I don't know what the term was. The RSAP members should actively participate in the working group, right? Which we are trying to do. However, we're also pretty busy during the week, and so we probably have created a little bit of a scheduling nightmare here, because you need a whole bunch of 4 people ideally, right, that own the stream. So if one of us isn't here, maybe at one of those meetings, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not interested in actively participating. Just sort of put that on the record. It might be there's conflicts.
Understood. John Clenson.
Two things briefly. One is a comment on Lars's comment, which is that given the difficulties of scheduling this meeting along with everything else during the IETF week, in addition to the RSAB problem, there are ordinary working group problems. There's a working group I should really be in now, and I've discovered that even remotely I can't be in two places at the same time. And that might be a very strong argument for holding a significant fraction of these meetings, if not all of them, on an interim basis and entirely remote. The second observation, which is why I put my hand up, is that we went through Brian's list, or the portion of Brian's list which made it in the agenda, rather quickly. And I apologize for joining late, and if this has already been covered, but I want to make certain that we, as was said, turn these things into tickets and address them on the list, because I noticed that a lot of comments on them, through no fault of people, through no fault of Eck or others summarizing, just did not go into the depth that those bullet point highlights were intended to raise, based upon off-list conversations I've had with Brian about some of them.
No, absolutely. And one of the chair's first duties is to get an issue tracker set up, get those things in, and get discussion going. As I said earlier, and I don't know if you were present for it, we sort of view, before there's a draft about the topic, we will moderate any discussion that goes on the list, or in meetings on particular topics until such momentum has occurred that we get someone to write it down in a draft and ask for adoption, and then it will become a work item. But we'll definitely keep those loose issues that aren't attached to a draft in part of the issue tracker, so that people can go and look and say, yeah, let's get on this and write a draft.
That's great and exactly right. I don't know if others have had the problem, but as a semi-personal request, be careful if that issue tracker is in GitHub, because GitHub is wonderful if you are actively following a particular conversation all the time, looking at the pull requests and absorbing things that way. But for somebody who is intermittently tracking a particular effort or trying to watch that effort while doing a lot of things, it can be so confusing as to become useless.
The proposal we floated earlier, John, was that we'd form the discussions on make the issues on GitHub, but the discussion wouldn't happen on a list, and we'd simply track the status on the GitHub issues. And so that should, I believe, capture what you're hoping for.
That should be pretty close, at least. If not, and you've already gotten that far, we can tune it. Thank you.
Sure. Mark Nottingham, you're up.
Is that working? Yeah. So regarding the working style, I understand that while we're getting things going, synchronous meetings are important, and but hopefully I would really like to see the group resolving most of its issues and having most of its discussions asynchronously. I think because frankly a lot of the people here are pretty time poor, and as we've seen, scheduling is difficult. I'd like to see the synchronous meetings reserved eventually for just, resolving those issues that we've identified that really need that kind of time. So that's what I'd encourage the chairs to try and move towards. But what I originally got into queue for was, in my mind, one of the most urgent and probably practical things we can start with is figuring out how to continue the evolution of the format and that set of documents. And I presume that this group has the authority to do that. The question is, as I think Gecker was saying, what are the details of how we go about that? And so I guess I have a question, is it really the expectation that we need a draft to propose how we adopt those drafts and process them? And will that proto draft need to go to an RFC? Is that the process we've set up here?
So 9280 does specify that there needs to be a draft. That is actually a requirement of 9280. It does not, as far as I know, need to be an RFC. It gets passed over to the RSAB, and they implement it as a policy, or they don't, or they more to the point, might come back to us with concerns that need to be addressed. But as far as I know, they are not published as RFCs.
I think you may perhaps be talking past each other. So I think if Mark wanted to propose, Mark, you're muted.
Is there anybody working on such a draft now?
Sorry. Let me try Mark, and then maybe you can
Hello?
argue with me.
Is this working? No.
Yes, we can hear you, but you can't hear us. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is anybody working on such a draft now?
No. So Mark, I think let me just try to clarify, because I think maybe you and Pete are talking past each other. My sense is if you wanted to write a draft that was about evolving the format, and the format should only be like carved in stone tablets, you could do that right now, and you wouldn't need a proto draft to do that draft. So I think but the eventually proposals have to be in form of draft. But I don't think we need a draft to create a process to update the format. If you had if you have ideas about how to fix the format, I think you can propose them directly. You don't need a separate draft to propose how to propose it.
Well, so I'd like to see this group start working on the evolution, not necessarily as I think that we need to think about how we go about that and what the right process for it is. So it sounds like we do maybe need a draft for that.
Perhaps I think if you have a structure in mind, we would need to document. We
would
need some way to
otherwise, let's just adopt them.
Yeah. Well, I think if we had, I guess my sense is we need a group of people who want to work on updating the format, and enough agreement that we think we can make some progress on that. And then if there's something complicated that isn't just we're just going to rev the documents, then we need to figure out what that is. And if we're just going to rev the documents, we could adopt a best, basically.
Right. Well, to be clear, there's already a revision underway.
Right. So that my understanding is that revision should at least be partly taken over by this group.
Okay.
And what I mean
we should start doing that, and I'm looking for how to do that.
Yeah. I think the question that's also resolved, that was sort of being sort of bounced around earlier, is exactly like, should this group own the entire thing, soup to nuts, including like, the names of the tags, or should it not? And I think that was like a question which I think maybe Robert and I, and like I'm happy to do what the community wants to do, so I'm not here to like enforce anything in particular. But like I felt like there was some sense from like Mike and others that maybe we should know the names of the tags, but maybe I misunderstood. So let's hear what people think. Oh, and
Okay.
next we have Elliot.
Well,
Oh, Mark, sorry.
Well, just to that point, to me, the names of the tags is the core semantics, and I think that's that's not
Okay.
implementation.
Thank you. Now,
Yeah, I
Elliot.
wanted to add one quick comment, which is I know John Levine has been documenting a number of issues that he's facing, and it would be good if this group invited him to discuss those, so that when we make sure that we're capturing everything that he's seeing at the operational level, and then you can get a feel for, oh, that's policy, that's not policy, and you get a little running code in the process. Thanks.
Lars Egger, so with respect to 7991 bis, we actually discussed a little bit between the RSAP or the stream owners, or you want to call this, and the RPC. And one proposal would be because I think John said that basically we're at a state where 7991 bis actually finally describes accurately what the tooling is doing. And so one way would be to actually publish this as a record, and then start the continuing work here to do, because otherwise we sort of taken a document that has sort of been long coming and been waiting for, and we potentially delay it more because people want to do more stuff. So I personally would prefer if we could publish this relatively quickly and then do the work here to do 7991 bis.
My sense is we would need to sign off on that, but that it could be done that way.
To this group, right? Because it's clearly in your charter, and if you didn't want to do this, you couldn't, you can choose not to do it, but I would recommend we do it that way.
Yeah, could have been, and this is kind of similar about what I wanted to say, because this is really a BIS document that just fixes stuff. And it's a BIS document of an IAB stream document. And I think that the faster way to proceed here would just be publish the BIS also on the IAB stream, and then you start over new with a clean version, basically. I'm happy to like have a short discussion or kind of a short feedback round here if this is ready to go, but I would still take it on the IAB stream and get it done quickly.
I mean, my sense is 9280 does not permit that.
I mean, it's an update of an IAB document, right? So this is like anyway in the gray zone.
I don't think it's really in the gray zone, but okay.
I think it's in the gray zone. So the 7991. What does it not permit?
I don't believe I do not believe the IAB can BIS this document and publish it as an RFC and have it be binding on anything. I think it has to come through Rswg, because we are now the sole authority on like what the RFC series looks like.
So, but this is that's what I'm saying. So this is an IAB document. This is a BIS document that fixes things. So it's not like a new thing, right? And it's like this document might anyway be in a line where we don't know if it's policy or not, right? It's not clear policy or something like that.
Well, but Miria, I mean, you could say that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened in previous documents that were in the IAB stream.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think now that we've converted over to RSWG, at least now that it's established, that document sounds like it belongs on the editorial stream and should come through the working group, even though the previous one was in the IAB. I don't think that makes it gray in terms of process.
At the end, I don't care. At the end, we need the RFC.
Right.
And what I'm saying here is that the work is already done. I think we should just publish it right now in the fastest way we can. And I think just proving it by the IAB, having it published as a BIS document is the fastest way we can. And then start the actual work in this group.
I agree. I don't think there's a difference in, us calling the consensus or the IAB calling the consensus at this point. I think it will accomplish that in the same amount of time. It would just simply be a bringing it to this group, make sure that we're agreed that the community is okay with 7991 bis, and we call the consensus and pass it over to the RSAB to approve. I don't think it's going to take any less time for the IAB to go through the same process.
I'm not sure, but we can try anything. So like this group has to decide.
I'm not. Mark. No. No.
Hello. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think it's the characterization that people want to add new things to it is not really relevant. I'm sure that somebody out there somewhere maybe does, but that's not what's top of mind for me. It's that the current BIS document incorporates a lot of changes to 7991, whatever it was, that were inserted by the tooling effectively. And that may be the right thing to do, but those changes need to see some daylight. And I think that they need to go through this working group process and make sure that we understand what those changes are and that they're the right changes to make, and then we can publish it. And I don't think that's going to add a lot of time, but I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think anyone's proposing, oh, let's open up 7991 and add a bunch of new tags and do a bunch of new stuff. That's not what's really on the table. We do want to get it out fast. I agree with that. But we need to make sure that the changes that have happened to date have seen appropriate daylight.
So I just want to comment quickly because I mean, John is more the expert than I am, but you know these changes have happened already. They are already deployed and they are all in the tooling. We're just updating the document.
Yes, and it's still quite a mess, as I understand it.
Well, okay, without taking a position on the technical matter of the data, right? The changes were made without any consensus process at all. And so the purpose of this is now to have a consensus process that like covers the entire community.
Are you still on this topic, John?
Oh, yes.
Because we do have a queue, and I assume on the same topic.
Yeah.
So
No, this apropos of this particular thing.
yes.
I agree. There's a whole bunch of changes, many of which I don't think were a good idea either. Okay, but they are the way that they are the way we've been publishing RFCs for the past year. So in particular, if we say this change was a bad idea and we should back it out, we can't do that without also saying, and what are we going to do about all the all the RFCs that use it? Are we going, you know, I think we need to make a pass over the XML and reissue them with cleaning up the XML. But my guess is that's going to take more than a few days of discussion.
Understood. Robert, you're in the queue.
So I want to express my support for publishing what's been built, even if we disagree that what's been built is what we should be doing. I think that having that captured so that we can document the RFCs that have been published to date is going to be important while we are going through the fight about whether or not we actually revise RFCs, to republish. That's going to be a long fight. So I would like to actually have an RFC artifact that says this is what the tooling is currently doing. Even if it's full of commentary that says we don't think you should do that anymore, and then do the step that says this is what we should change.
Paul, you're up next.
So one problem we have in this, and I really, really want to emphasize this, 7791 BIS is not a BIS document. It is a description of a possibly bad implementation. It is also a good implementation, which is why the implementer did it. But let's stop thinking about this as 7991 BIS. Going back to what Miria said, it would be good for us to publish a document that says, what are we doing today, and actually backtrack it to, and we started doing these things on this date. but it's not fodder for starting 7991 bis. Some of the stuff will go in, some of it won't. There will be a consensus process, but let's conceptually really split that out between a document that says, starting on this date, XML RFCs started looking like this, and what do we want later? Completely different work.
And a big thumbs up from Mike in the corner. Elliot, you're up.
Hi, a question and a comment. I'll go with the comment first. My question will be for Paul, just so you know, Paul. My comment is that it seems like what we have here is a great opportunity to sort of exercise the process a little bit, and hopefully on something that isn't quite, I was going to say too controversial, but now I'm not so sure. But I actually look forward to seeing that. I think it's a good thing for the work to happen here and not in the IAB for exactly this reason, that we should learn how to use our processes to do these updates. Unless there's something that's absolutely critical that has to happen yesterday, and then I'm not even sure then the IAB should deal with it. My question to Paul was, if you don't view this the document as a BIS document, is it setting a standard? I don't mean in the IETF sense, but I mean in terms of the specification sense. Is it setting a set of rules by which the documents are published, or is it what is it documenting? Because I sort of lost you there a little bit about what it is you wanted. Thanks for clarifying.
This is Paul Hoffman. So I believe what it is documenting is an implementation of 7991, which was done by an implementer who changed a lot of things on purpose. Documented some of them, some of them got backtracked, but it is an implementation description document. It is not a standard, and it was certainly not agreed to in the way that the original spec was agreed to, which was, it was an IAB document. It had a lively IETF last call, changes were big, the original document was that way. This is not documenting something that went through that process. It's an implementation.
So before, Lars, you make a comment, I have a question that you and other stream heads are probably going to need to answer, which is, are you comfortable with RSWG publishing a document which in effect says we have an implementation of how XML is being used right now in RFCs. We are publishing this document for the purpose of documenting that for people who are using it. And in the future, we are going to likely set new policy, which creates what we're going to do in the future, but this documents it for purposes of use only. Is that a comfortable thing to do for this group?
Lars Eggert, yes. So this is actually what I was going to say. Coming to the microphone, you said it for me. So I think all of this is fine. So I personally would like a document that describes what the current tools are doing. I think that's also what Robert's concern is, that we have sort of a description of what we have now. Whether that's what we want or not is up to debate, and I am hearing it's not. That's fine, right? I don't really have not religious views here, but we've operated for too long in a situation where the description of what should be done and what actually was done were different, and it confused a lot of things. And if we have a chance to sort of align that and then move on from it pretty much immediately, that's completely fine. And whether it's 1791 bis or not, I actually don't care, right? It could be an individual document that says, here's a description of the tool, and we leave it at that.
Okay. Oh, and Lars had
Question
something
back
else.
to you. If we publish the document like that, would that need to be on the RSWG stream, on the editorial stream, or could that be on a different stream?
I guess my take with chair hat on is it's not necessarily setting policy. It is purely descriptive of the tool, so it need not be on the RSWG. But if the RSAB thinks that it's okay to put that kind of policy in the editorial stream, I don't think I don't have a problem taking it on as a working group item. Miria, you want to comment on this or other pieces of it?
So this is just not as IB chair or RSAB member or whatever. You know, this work, the BIS document is already done. It's really just like reflecting what's implemented. It needs to be published. And I think it's a waste of time for this group. We should, and like, because Elliot says this might be a good thing to like test our process, but it's not. Because it's done, we need just to publish it. We should take on more important issues on this group.
Ecker from the floor.
Yeah, I got down here because I wasn't sure if this is a chair comment or a personal comment. So it seems to me this document has two, despite having one set of text, has two meanings. One set of meanings is this is the behavior of this tool and the structure of the documents up until the moment this document is published. And that is a documentation function. And the second is, and going forward, if you wish to have your things published, it must conform to the syntax until it changes. And that is a policy and specification function. And now we've been operating in this like law-free zone where the tool just dictated these policy decisions and like when it never had consensus. But like we have to, but the point of the exercise is to get to the point where that's no longer the case and where those policy decisions come from somewhere. And so if people wish to like cease publishing RFCs from the moment this document is published until a BIS is published, then that's like totally crime, and that document can go anywhere, including on a website. But if people wish to be out of the law-free zone and have a document which has text, which enforces text about how things are supposed to behave, then that has to come from here. Otherwise, like I don't understand like what right anybody at the RPC has to say your document must look like X versus Y.
Mark is up to bat.
No, there it is, working. So people are talking about this document as it's documenting what a tool does. The problem is that there are more than one tool now touching this format. And I find it really confusing and concerning that the IETF, which is supposed to be, you know, this body of knowledge and people who understand how interoperability works, are basing something on one implementation and not on documenting an interoperable format that people can write tools to. I don't think this document is done. I think it needs people to at least understand, you know, what decisions have been made, and we need to make sure that we make some practical decisions about what it contains. It may be that there are some things that aren't optimal that we still leave in, but we can't just wave our hands and say, oh, that's not our problem. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Julian, you are up. Julian, you have to turn on your microphone and video. There you are.
Okay, sorry for that. Hopefully this works. I don't have a headset here. I didn't expect that. I wanted to say something. I wanted to point out two things. What we are going to do here is essentially exactly what was planned quickly after 7991 was published, because that was published with the understanding that this is a snapshot that would be quickly revised based on implementation feedback. And how long is that ago? 7 years, 8 years? So what we are doing now, hopefully, is starting that work properly. That should have started ages ago. And it's good that we are doing that. The other thing I mentioned on the chat, there are different kinds of flaws in the BIS document, and actually in the 7991 as well. And some of them, if we fix them, we will have to touch published canonical XML, because it affects metadata, and the metadata definitions are ambiguous. And we have open tickets for that. And I think we really should not publish anything as RFC for which we know that we will have to take it back. So publishing a snapshot is good as long as we are roughly okay with the contents. And those issues that will affect published XML, and that we will have to convert these documents once should be on our top list, and we should work on that first. And then if we have that resolved, we can consider publishing a snapshot as RFC.
So we are now out of time and have 5 people left in the queue. We can creep over a couple of minutes until we are chased out. But Paul, if you would like to make a quick comment.
I would like to make a quick comment that this will not be quick, and therefore I don't think it's appropriate to have the IAB just publish it. I think it should be in a place where it can be discussed.
Thank you. Miria.
So Paul, yes, it should be, but it will not be quick, right? So that's why I would like to publish this and then start a new document. And the reason why I want to publish this is I want to use Mark's argument against him. It's interoperability, right? Other implementations should be able to actually implement what we need. So we need to document it, and that's the reason. And like what I'm hearing is that I don't like this group needs consensus to publish something. We will not reach this consensus. So I don't think publishing this document as it is in this group is actually an option. But I still think we should publish it.
Lars.
Yeah, Lars, I agree with Maria that I think we should publish this as a record of where we are. And I also am fine with if the RSWG wants to publish this document on the editorial stream, because I mean, we're not starting from a clean slate, like far from it, right? We have a lot of history here and it's complicated. And I think we can, if you hold our nose and we say, this is not perfect, but it's what the current tooling requires to get internet drafts and RFCs published. And it'll change in the future, but here's what it currently is. I think there's value in that. And, I agree with Mark, right? It hasn't seen consensus or not enough. And it's really sort of based on what one implementer did. But it is what it is. And basically pretending it isn't is not going to help anybody. So I really want this published if we can. And then immediately, as soon as that start the work of doing a consensus-based follow-on.
John, I believe you have the last word on this topic. Sorry, Julian, we are over.
I thought Maria and I were in complete agreement until her last sentence, and now I'm not sure anymore. Partially because I agree with Mark. I think it's important to get a snapshot of this thing published and publish it soon, but make clear that that snapshot is a snapshot of an implementation. It's not normative, and there's no expectation that other implementations should run off and conform to it until there's an opportunity to discuss the issues of contention. I think a snapshot helps us figure out where those issues of contention are, and that's a good idea. But I think we need to be very, very clear about what we're doing here. Thank you.
So I'm hearing that what we're going to do is hopefully Paul has some good notes on this and post them to the list. We will watch the list for a little while, see if people have additional comments that change what has been said in the room, and then Ecker and I will put our heads together and see what we've heard and come out with some sort of call on this. All right, with that, we are 3 minutes over and much appreciated. And I'm surprised we actually got some substantive discussion done. So that's nice. Thank you all. What's that? You don't have to.
If it is actually, if they've taken it down to that, fully repurposed it, all the
It looks
that's why they've asked me. That's